Hey, I'm your buddy Bob. Welcome to another episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue. We're searching out those pop and rock acts of the 1950s to the 1990s. And here we go. You know, the last 4 days or so, we spent part of the day in New York City and some of the boroughs. And today, we are going to be on our way to Boston, Massachusetts. But first, we need to make a stop in rural New York State, specifically Pawling, New York. This is the home of Daryl's Place. It's owned by Daryl Hall, one half of the Hall and Oates, and it's close to Daryl's home in Millerton, New York. Live shows can be seen here to this day. They're great shows from what I'm told. Daryl has done many podcasts and videocasts from this site as well over the years. As a duo, Daryl Hall and John Oates have sold more records than any other duo. They had 6 number one hits. Now, among them, they had Rich Girl, The Kiss on My List, Private Eyes, I Can't Go For That, Maneater, and Out of Touch. In their early days, they were managed by Tommy Mottola, who later became Mariah Carey's husband. And you'll remember in our previous episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue, we visited the hometown of Mariah Carey on Long Island and her high school there as well. Well, back to Daryl Hall and John Oates. Their first top 10 hit was in 1975. The song was called Sarah Smile. It was written by both Hall and Oates, and it was about Hall's girlfriend at the time. And by the way, she was a 30-year girlfriend. Her name was Sarah Allen, and over the years, she helped write some of the duo songs. And by the way, Sarah Allen was born nearby in Worcester, Ohio. Daryl Hall and John Oates are in the Hall of Fame. We'll have more on John Oates when we get to both of them, actually. But specifically John Oates when we get to Philadelphia. Both he and Daryl Hall are from the Philadelphia area, and they met in Philadelphia while they were students at Temple University there. They are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, we're off to Beantown now, historic Boston, Massachusetts. Our first stop is at 325 Commonwealth Avenue, or Com Ave, as the locals call it. This is the Aerosmith apartment. Now, read the sign very carefully. This is a communal apartment in the early days of Aerosmith. And here is the apartment building at 325 Com Avenue. Well, Stevie Tyler and Joe Perry were the songwriters that mostly wrote Aerosmith songs. Stevie Tyler was born in Yonkers, New York, and Joe Perry is from Hopedale, Massachusetts. It's a small town south of Boston. I remember the World Series of Rock every year in Cleveland. And parenthetically, by the way, remember when you could buy tickets for that big shindig for just $7 or $8 at the door. This was amazing to me because they had a variety of great bands on the bill for that low price. Of course, be worth a lot more in today's dollars. Well, anyway, at the 1979 production of the World Series of Rock, Joe Perry's wife and the wife of band member Tom Hamilton got in a fight at the show. I remember that distinctly, and this led to Joe Perry leaving the band Aerosmith. Aerosmith in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Well, let's head over to Kenmore Square now in Boston to 590 Com Avenue. This was once a very cool club. It was called the Psychedelic Supermarket. It was a very short-lived club, a couple of years. Wellesley, Massachusetts native Billy Squier played here early in his career. That's why I bring it up. Now, the venue is today a part of the Science Lab of Boston University. You see it on the screen right now. But Billy Squier played here early in his career, as did a woman named Donna Gaines. We'll talk about her a little bit later. That was not her stage name, but she played early gigs here as well. But anyway, this was where Billy Squier started, but it took him a long time before he would break through. 1981 was his breakthrough hit. The song was called The Stroke. And that was followed by In the Dark and My Kinda Lover, all from his album Don't Say No, and all written by Billy Squier. Well, after I left 590 Comm Avenue, I turned the corner and lo and behold, there was the back of the venerable Fenway Park where the Boston Red Sox play. And speaking of the Red Sox, after home victories, they play the song Dirty Water. That was a 1966 hit by a one-hit garage band called the Standells, who are from Los Angeles. Now, the writer of this song had been in Boston. He was aware of the heavily polluted Charles River there. The lyric line, well, I love that dirty water. Oh, Boston, you're my home. They sing the song about the Charles River after Red Sox victories. And here is the Charles River on a foggy morning off Storrow Avenue. I find it interesting that the writer of Dirty Water, Ed Cobb, wrote this song, and it was an early punk rock song. It had that punk rock sound to it. By the way, the Ramones, punk rockers extraordinaire, said they were influenced by this song. But here's what I find a little bit interesting. Cobb also wrote the softer Tainted Love by Soft Cell, which was a big hit in the 1980s. Well, you know, Chicago had a band from there named Chicago, and Boston had a band from there named Boston. And this is one of my favorite stories. There was a young man by the name of Tom Scholes who was from Toledo, Ohio, and he went to MIT. Pretty smart guy, huh? After graduation, he worked nearby at Polaroid Corporation in Cambridge, across the river from Boston. In his home in nearby Watertown, he had a studio in his basement. And he essentially produced an album there that would become the first for his band that eventually would be named Boston. This is the home where much of the album came to fruition. Tom Scholes, lead singer, along with Brad Delp, had big hits starting in 1976. More Than a Feeling, Don't Look Back, and their only number one hit, Amanda, in 1986. Well, let's get back into the city of Boston and a long-forgotten club, a very famous one, called The Channel at 25 Necco Street. Interestingly, this is not far from the site of the Boston Tea Party in 1773. This is a place where many of the new Boston area bands would get their start, among them the Pixies, who actually had a bigger career in Europe than they did at home in the U.S., although they did have Monkey Gone to Heaven and Here Comes Your Man. Those were hits in the late 1980s. Established bands like The Cars played the channel, as well as well, of course, the Cars were formed in the 1970s in Boston, but they actually had an earlier connection in Cleveland and Columbus, Ohio, that we'll discuss on a future episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue. Anyway, the channel was demolished about 30 years ago to make room for the Big Dig. This was the most expensive highway project in U.S. history. Lots of cost overruns, criminal activities, much more. And it plagued this project over many, many years. Well, here are the buildings today at 25 Necco Street. You'd never know that a very famous club in Boston existed here at one time. Well, another Boston band that did play at the Channel was known for hard rock and heavy metal. So it's really interesting to me that their biggest hit was an acoustic ballad. You might remember More Than Words, a number one hit for the band Extreme in 1991. Extreme played the Channel. They also played the famous Toad's Place in New Haven, Connecticut, a couple hours south of Boston. Toad's Place, since 1975, has featured acts from Jagger to Dylan to Johnny Cash to Snoop Dogg, and it's near the Yale University campus and down the street from Yale University Hospital, where incidentally, a U.S. president and a hugely successful pop duo of the 1970s were born. Who do you think I'm talking about? Give you a second to think about it. Well, the U.S. president born here was the 43rd president, George W. Bush, and the pop duo were Richard and Karen Carpenter. One of the biggest of Boston bands was the New Edition, led by Bobby Brown and four of his neighbors in the Orchard Park housing project. It was torn down. It's in the rough and tumble Roxbury area of Boston, but it had to be torn down. It was at 120 Eustis Street. It was demolished due to high crime in the area. The Orchard Park apartments are here now, with the school nearby. Now, the young boys got their first big break around the corner at the Strand Theater, located here at 543 Columbia Road. New Edition's big hits were Candy Girl and Cool It Now and The Telephone Man, all in the early to mid-1980s. Bobby Brown, of course, was married to Whitney Houston. It was a combative relationship. They divorced in 2007. They produced one child, Bobby Christina Brown, who sadly died a few years after her mother due to an overdose of drugs. New Edition was an African-American group, and after a heated disagreement with their management, the management searched for a new Edition, but a white one in this case, and they came up with several kids from nearby Dorchester, Mass. It's a suburb right around the corner from Roxbury. Donnie Wahlberg was one of the first to be hired, then his brother, Mark, and several of Donnie's buds. They became New Kids on the Block, hanging tough, step by step, and I'll Be Loving You helped them to become one of the top-grossing entertainment acts soon afterwards. But lip-syncing allegations, remember Milli Vanilli at about the same time too, dogged the New Kids in the early 90s, and their popularity began to fade. But the boy band craze would not stop. The Backstreet Boys would come soon after, and NSYNC. And in fact, I sometimes get all these acts mixed up a little bit. Well, here's the home where the Wahlbergs lived in Dorchester, Mass. In 2022, fire damaged part of this triple-decker house. Ooh, love to love you, baby. I'm talking about the Queen of Disco in the 1970s. It went on to reinvent herself in the 80s. Her name was Donna Adrienne Gaines, and she became known as Donna Summer. Remember, I talked about her playing at the Psychedelic Supermarket in the late 60s as well. Who can forget the lyrics to the #1 hit, Hot Stuff? Remember Steve Allen reading these lyrics as part of his routine? Love to Love You, Baby was a #1 on the dance charts in 1975. So was Last Dance in 78, as was the cover of MacArthur Park. Bad Girls, Dim All the Lights, and On the Radio followed. Perhaps her signature song of the 80s was She Works Hard for the Money. Donna Summers, the iconic pop and dance artist, grew up in this neighborhood, in the Mission Hill neighborhood of Roxbury, Boston, on Parker Hill. Donna Summers in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Boston is where James Taylor was born. His father was a resident physician at Massachusetts General, where he was born. And when James was quite young, the family moved to North Carolina. His dad got a professorship of medicine there. And perhaps this explains the lyrics in his 1969 song, Carolina in My Mind. Gotta make it back home again. Gotta make it back to Carolina soon. Well, this song was released on the Apple Records label, makes James Taylor the first non-British performer signed to Apple Records. Well, a quick wrap-up of today's artists that we visited who are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame: Daryl Hall and John Oates, Aerosmith, Donna Summer, and James Taylor. The city of Boston claims the Cars as their own, and more on the Cars in another episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue, as we visit many of the very important sites in Ohio where they really got to know each other before going to Boston. Well, another episode of Rock and Roll Travelogue coming up later. I'm your buddy Bob, saying until next time, good heart and stout luck.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.